There was this old woman who woke up one morning not knowing her entire life was about to shatter, and what happened next would teach an entire village a lesson they'd never forget. She lived on a small farm in California, a place she and her late husband had built together with their own hands over decades of hard work. And she was left standing there with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. She sat down on the front step and cried until the sun went down and the stars came out, crying for the life she had lost and the daughter who had turned into a stranger. What that cruel daughter and her worthless husband didn't know. They had squirreled away money year after year, hiding it in a stone box buried near the old corral, a secret place nobody else knew about. Insurance for a day they hoped would never come. That night, when darkness covered everything and she had no tears left to cry, the old woman walked slowly to that corral, her knees screaming with pain. And she moved those heavy stones one by one until she found what she was looking for, her savings, her second chance, her way out. With that money tucked safely away, she started walking toward the next village, putting one painful step in front of the other, refusing to look back at the place that had rejected her. A kind farm family in the village recognized her face, remembered her from years ago, and they gave her hot food, warm tea, and a small room where she could rest her weary body for the night. The next morning when the sun rose and gave her strength, she asked if there was any land for sale around there, and they told her yes, there was a good piece available. She bought it right then and there, no hesitation, no second thoughts. With help from neighbors who saw something special in this determined old woman, she built a strong wooden house with her own design, planted rows of corn that would grow tall and proud, kept chickens that laid eggs every morning, and slowly but surely created a peaceful life that was entirely her own. A young boy from a neighboring farm started coming around to help her with chores, respectful and kind in ways her own family had forgotten how to be, and she appreciated him more than he'd ever know. Meanwhile, back at the old farm, her daughter and son-in-law were drowning in their own choices. They didn't work because they didn't know how. They'd never had to before, and their house that they'd stolen started falling apart around them. The yard filled up with weeds that grew higher every week. The roof started leaking when it rained, and they argued constantly about whose fault everything was. They still believed the old woman had nothing, that she was probably begging on some street corner somewhere, and that thought gave them satisfaction. One day the son-in-law finally decided he needed to find work because they were completely broke, so he walked far from the village looking for anyone who would hire him. He came across this beautiful farm with a sturdy house and healthy crops, and he knocked on the door hoping for a job. When that door opened and the old woman stood there looking right at him, his jaw dropped and all he could say was "You," barely believing what he was seeing. She looked at him calmly and said, "Yes," with no anger in her voice, just quiet strength. He stammered and begged for work, admitting he had no money and no food, desperate in ways he'd never been before. She agreed to hire him, but with one condition that he had to swear to. He could never tell her daughter that this farm belonged to her mother. He promised immediately because he had no other choice, and he started working there every day. And the old woman never once treated him badly, even though she had every right to. She only asked him one question regularly: "How is my daughter?" And he always lied and said she was fine, even though they both knew she wasn't. One morning the daughter got suspicious about where her husband was going every day, so she followed him through the fields and over the hills until she reached this magnificent farm she'd never seen before. She walked into the yard, and there was her mother, healthy and strong, and clearly doing just fine without them. The daughter exploded, screaming about how her mother had all this while she was suffering, how unfair it was, how she deserved some of this wealth. The old woman just stood there and let her scream until she ran out of breath, then said quietly, "When you finish shouting, you can speak to me." The daughter demanded money, demanded the house, demanded anything she could get her greedy hands on. The old woman gave her only a few coins, barely enough for a week's food, and closed the door in her face just like her daughter had done to her months before. The couple burned through that money in days, buying things they didn't need, eating at taverns they couldn't afford, and when it was gone they were right back where they started. They got so desperate they sold their old house and land, convinced themselves that when the old woman eventually died, they'd inherit this beautiful new farm and everything would work out. But the old woman had already made her decision long before. She sat down and wrote a will with clear words that couldn't be misunderstood, leaving her entire farm to the young boy who had helped her when she had absolutely no one, and specifically stating that her daughter would receive nothing. Not 1 inch of land, not $1, nothing at all. When the old woman finally passed away peacefully years later, the village buried her with respect and honor, recognizing her for the strong woman she'd been. Her daughter and husband showed up at the farm with smiles on their faces, ready to claim what they thought was theirs. But the neighbors gathered around and told them the truth that shattered their world. Everything belonged to the boy now, legally and rightfully. The couple stood there shocked and ashamed, realizing too late what their cruelty had cost them, and they left the village that very day. Nobody ever saw them again, and nobody cared to look. So here's what this story teaches us. And you need to hear this today. Even when people who are supposed to love you push you down into the dirt, even when they throw you away like you're nothing, even when they slam doors in your face and leave you crying on the steps, you can still rise again. Your value isn't decided by people who mistreat you. Your worth isn't determined by those who can't see it. And your future isn't controlled by those who tried to destroy your past. With courage and self-respect, with determination and dignity, you can rebuild your entire life from nothing. Kindness grows like seeds planted in good soil. It multiplies and comes back to you. Greed destroys everything it touches, leaving nothing but emptiness and regret. Choose strength when weakness seems easier. Choose dignity when bitterness feels justified. And choose your own path forward when everyone else tries to hold you back. That's how you win.